In this video, I present some backstories about various works. The works will be introduced in the order in which they were published. First, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. It seems that he had a lot of trouble deciding how to end this story. There were 4 choices for the ending. The shadow stays and the protagonist leaves. The protagonist stays and the shadow leaves. Both leave. Both remain. I had to choose one of them. When I reached the last chapter, I was at a complete loss as to what to do. I had written 3 different endings, but I can't quite remember how I settled on the one. I feel like it could have been a different ending. I think I chose the ending that exists today because it was the best fit for the flow of the story. At the time, it seemed like the most natural ending. Next, let's talk about the Wind-Up Chronicle. At the initial draft stage, it seemed to be a single story that included South of the Border, West of the Sun. Actually, the first chapter of South of the Border, West of the Sun was included in the Wind-Up Chronicle, but it got in the way. So I took it out and started writing a completely different novel with it. To be more specific, the protagonist of this South of the Border, West of the Sun was originally the same person as Toru Okada, the protagonist of the Wind-Up Chronicle. The unidentified phone call that comes in at the beginning of the Wind-Up Chronicle is really a call from Izumi, the wife of Toru Okada. The reason for this seems to have been Mrs. Yoko's opinion after reading the first draft. She said, "It's interesting, but I think it contains too many elements to be a single book. This tends to disrupt the main line of the story. It would be better to make it a little clearer." Regarding South of the Border, West of the Sun, he later wrote, "I thought I wrote this novel very carefully and earnestly with all my heart as an important story that branched off from the Wind-Up Chronicle. But it seems that some people did not seem to take it that way when it was published in Japan, and I had some regrets about that." Haruki Murakami also wrote about the gap between Part 2 and Part 3 as follows. "It is true that there may be a gap. I think that it can be helped if there is a gap to some extent. This is because there is actually a shift of several years between the first and second parts, and the third part. To be more precise, I initially thought I would finish the story with Part 1 and Part 2, but after a while, I thought, this is not good enough. I had to write more. I felt that I had a responsibility to continue writing further." Next, I would like to talk about After the Quake. It seems that he had a set of rules for writing this work. One is to write in the third person. The second rule was to write a story about earthquakes, but not to deal with them directly. The third rule is that the stories must be about the Kobe earthquake, but must not be set in Kobe or the surrounding area. Put another way, I wanted to write a story about the earthquake, but not about the earthquake itself or the people directly affected by it. Next is Kafka on the Shore. It seems that there was an episode in this work that was cut. Actually, in the first draft, there was an episode in which noodles were raining down on the town of Kobe, but some people thought it was too much, so I had to cut it out. Haruki Murakami wrote about this scene in detail elsewhere. As for the noodle drop scene, Hoshino suddenly got into an argument with 2 old men in a restaurant in Kobe, which resulted in Nakata unintentionally raining noodles on the city of Kobe. Next, let's talk about 1Q84. Haruki Murakami wrote the following about the sequel to this story. "I've been thinking long and hard about whether or not to write Book 4, a sequel to 1Q84, but I'm hesitating, because it would require me to go back and read the 3 books I wrote before and take notes on each one, which would be a bit tedious because it is a very complicated story. I don't like to prepare and write things. I am exploring various possibilities. I haven't reached a conclusion yet." My impression is that 1Q84 has a story before that and a story after that. It is like a long story of fate, so to speak. For example, where did Tengo's mother go? But I don't know if I should write about that or not. Finally, I would like to talk about colorless Tsukuru Tazeki and his years of pilgrimage. This novel was originally a short story. My intention was to write a relatively short story about Tsukuru Tazeki, who has to live his life quietly and mysteriously without knowing why he was denied his existence. The story took the form of a full-length novel as a result of Sarikimoto's comments. How was it? Various interesting changes were made.